For as long as I could remember, I've always enjoyed being afraid. And it's pretty plain to see in the media I consume. I watch a lot of horror movies, I enjoy a lot of horror games, but something I've always found was kind of interesting in terms of a topic of discussion was how horror as a genre intermingles with other genres to make something unique. Horror as a theme is very interesting because, by implication, it's not really a genre, it's more of an emotion that's elicited by a certain type of film. So by default, most horror films and horror games have other genres and themes interwoven into them in order for them to be a cohesive piece of media. Which is also why horror tends to mix well with every other setting. Horror sci-fi is one of the most explored genres out there. Horror fantasy, we have Berserk, and everybody knows the guy who has a tattoo on his neck. You name it, you could probably mix horror with any other genre and you'd get a pretty decent combination at the end of it. Which is why I wanted to point you all in the direction of some games that I referred to as horror games. Games that are not technically or traditionally horror, or really even thrillers, but they either lightly or heavily incorporate horror themes into the mix. Though I suppose there is one, and I'll point out my hypocrisy when we get to it, that I know you'll disagree with me on. Hell, I disagree with me on it. But I just wanted an excuse to talk about 5 games I think you might not know about, and to give them a spotlight for the whole 20 of you that actually watch these videos. Alongside that, before I get into it, just want to say, sorry for the wait. I am busy with other things. If you know, you know. I'm not going to get into it. I do a lot of things in the background, and yeah. So if you guys are here, feel free to drop a like, subscribe, because it does help the channel, and it shows me that you guys are actually interested in this horror content that I'm kind of brewing up here. I noticed that a few more of you started to accumulate out of the blue for no reason, and that makes me really happy, which is why I'm jumping back into this and seeing what we can do. So let's get into the first one. This game I don't think you're going to know, and I think that's a good thing and a bad thing. So yeah. In Stars and Time. I'm just gonna open that. This game is not everyone's cup of tea. I love it though. It's super cute, and I suppose saying it's a horror game is kind of stretching it, or even saying that it has horror themes is a bit of a stretch as well. It's more just, existential dread than anything else. But hey, I just wanted an excuse to talk about it. It's a cute little RPG Maker style indie game with a very distinct art style. The colors are kind of what stuck out to me most when I was kind of deciding to play it based on the recommendation of a close friend. It's fun. It's simple, but it's fun. And also, it's technically a sequel, but I started with this game, and from how I've been playing, I don't think you need to play the first one to understand this one, so, you know, do with that what you will. I'm simply just playing through it and having a good time. Though, for context, I haven't fully beaten the game just yet, but I did want to talk about it before I did, and then if I enjoyed it enough, I'll probably go back and talk about it more at length. And if you want me to make full videos about any games that I talked about on this list here, make sure to drop a comment and tell me which one you'd like to see more of, because I do have a lot to say about all of them, but I don't think I have enough to say yet about any individual one to justify a 20+ minute video, so make sure to let me know. The basic premise is it is sort of a post-adventure game, which is a topic that I don't see discussed a lot. Think Freren, but just before the adventure actually ended. So you have an entire party of level 40-somethings about to take on the final dungeon and slay the evil king, and that's where the game starts, with a lot of references to past adventures that this crew has gone on, likely covered in the prequel game, but I do think that this still kind of has a fun theme to it that you don't see covered that often. But in this specific game, you play the character of Sifrin, a cute little thing who is accompanied by the party members of Isabeau, Mirabelle, and Odile. I've only talked about this game with friends through text, so I have no idea if I'm saying these names correct. So we will just say Odile, because everything else kind of has like a French accent in my head. I'm probably wrong, but you know. Oh, and of course we couldn't forget Bonnie, who isn't really a party member, as they are just a child, but they do cooking as well as sometimes help out in combat with little random RNG-based mechanics that give either random buffs or random debuffs to the enemy, which is kind of where the game shines a lot, actually. There is this kind of fun rock, paper, scissors mechanic where each major attack and each character is assigned either rock, paper, or scissors, or both, and they're able to engage in mechanics like that. So say you're attacking something that's mechanic is they are a rock type enemy. If you attack them with someone like Odile, who is a paper type individual, they will do more damage and incur more effects. Then you have Sifrin, who is scissors. Then you have Mirabelle, who takes on two different individual characteristics, and Isabeau, who is rock, and also I love Isabeau. Isabeau is just, he's got a brain full of rocks, but god damn is he fun to talk to. That being said, I am getting a bit off topic. The game itself is super cute, but what makes the game horror enough that it deserves mention on this list? Well, this thing. This is Loop. They are an interesting sort. Some kind of cosmic being that has taken a shine to our dear Sifrin and allows them to loop time whenever they die or get frozen. I'm not going to spoil anything about the game, don't worry, this is all very early stuff to know about the game. But Loop is a character that is a specific character archetype that I have always found incredibly interesting. This archetype is the all-knowing one. A sort of character who knows a lot more than they're putting on, but they're not telling you, and it's not out of malice or out of some kind of benevolence, it's more just they want to ride this out and see where things go. It goes a little bit more complicated than that, but because of this, Sifrin is allowed to die and then loop, but also alongside dying, you can get frozen. And what do I mean by frozen? Well, the king that the party is out to stop is more of a king in name, not even in title. It's complicated. That is spreading a curse of stasis, a curse that freezes whatever it touches like a virus, and they are frozen in time forever, unchanging, unmoving, and so on. The theme of change and the theme of stagnancy is very common in this game, and it's very much something that you kind of have to focus in on, as the core mechanic of the game of looping ties into a, hey, if you had infinite chances to redo something over, what would you change in order to make it different? A lot of the game deals with characters who have lost family and friends to this frozen in time curse. But your party is obviously overtooled and geared up to deal with the king, right? All that time together, all the bonds you've formed, you probably know everything about your party members at this point. There totally won't be any long-lasting psychological consequences to you not having addressed past demons in any of your party's lives, right? Memories? Man, who needs memories, am I right? Yeah. This, although not really a horror game, can get a bit angsty with a lot of psychological aspects that are more just interestingly dark concepts to explore. It is a bit more into the horror side of things than something like, say, Undertale, but less so than something like, say, Off by Mortis Ghost. So it's somewhere in the middle there. And I think that it is fun, and I think you should check it out. The game itself is on Steam, and it's relatively cheap, and you should also check out the prequel. The art of the game is beautiful, the character designs are also really nice, and the characterization of each individual character is very distinct and very memorable. Again, I like Isabeau so much, and I'm probably pronouncing every single one of these names incorrectly, but regardless, as I said, it is on Steam. So, now that we've discussed this one, let's get to the next game, which is Nightmare Cart. One of, if not my favorite horror games of all time, at least my favorite Souls-like, is Bloodborne. It is a gothic horror masterpiece, and I think Sony should port it over to PC right now, please. I'll send the antidote and release the captives if you do. But what if I told you someone continued their legacy and made something insane out of it? The Bloodborne demake is one of the greatest things I've ever seen, made by PSX Bunlith, who I have been, weirdly enough, following since long before they even did both of these, so it's kind of cool to see this happen. But it's a what-if scenario if Bloodborne was made on the PlayStation 1. That is not the game we're talking about, as you could probably tell by the title of this section. It was wild watching this mad woman come up with a new idea in real time for a kart racer using the same shit that she made for Bloodborne PSX. And so, Bloodborne Kart was created. And she was creating a bunch of new content actively for it for the demo that was being released on itch.io. So a lot of people were getting pretty hyped for this. This game kicks ass. It's not horror per se, but it's really fun. It's got a lot more in common with something like Crash Team Racing crossed with Twisted Metal rather than, say, like Mario Kart. But this game is so fun to play. You're probably wondering, looking at this section, why is it referred to as Nightmare Kart and not Bloodborne Kart? So Sony found out the game got big enough that, it had to have its name changed. So changed the name of everything that Sony complained about, and now I think it's legally distinct enough to be its own game, and now it's been released on Steam because there's no more copyright issues. There isn't much else to say about the game. It just kicks ass, with kind of a lot of reminiscent traits to early PlayStation 1 games, with the multiplayer setting being perfect for online. They made it so it feels like you're on the local couch co-op with split screen. It's really, really nice. I am terrible at racing games, so if you judge me for the footage you're about to see and that you're seeing in the background, we have a problem. So to explain a little bit more about this game, there are two major modes to it. There is free play, which is the one where you can just dick around with a bunch of friends or just with AI, and the multiplayer of this game runs pretty smoothly. I haven't had any issues with it, but I've known a few people that have had issues with it when I was playing with them. And then there's the campaign mode, which is kind of insane to think that a free game made off of the back of just a passion project has its own campaign that's very well thought out, animated, with voice acting, and has a lot of detail in it, as well as classic style unlockables for your own usage. New weapons, new characters, and you can unlock them just by playing the game naturally. But alongside that, there's a cheat mode section where you can put cheat codes in to add new characters into the game. You can even add Bunlith, her model, into the game as one of the fodder enemies, and I think that's awesome. The game itself is super fun. The story mode is not really long, but there's a lot of nods to Bloodborne and where it came from, and I think that that's such a beautiful thing in terms of a passion project to add. There isn't much else to be added other than literally go play the game right now. It's free, and you can play up to 4 players in the multiplayer, so it's just fun. So why not go give it a shot? It's on Steam or itch.io. I'll probably put the link for it in itch.io in the description of this video so that you can, see it and get it for yourself, as well as support the creator, because she definitely put in a lot of work for this, and I want to see more stuff like this in the future. But also remember to download Bloodborne PSX if it's still available. I didn't check to see if it was, and if I find out that it wasn't, then I'm going to put something snide on the screen right now to let you know that, hey, it's not available, or you have to go to some sketchy site to grab it. So yeah, there is that. I would highly suggest it, and I think you're going to have a fun time because it's really good shit. Speaking of really good shit, have you guys seen that new indie game that came out? Crow Country. Okay, I'm just cheating here. This is just flat out a horror game. A pretty damn decent survival horror if I'm being completely honest. But I will say that the fact that this game can be described as, hey, you remember that analog horror about Animal Crossing but scary? No, not that one, the other one. Not the one I was thinking about, but I guess that one works. Never mind. Yeah, they actually made something similar into a actual survival horror game that was released on Steam this year, and it's actually pretty scary. I know I'm cheating, and I know by no means is this game actually obscure, because every survival horror and horror game content creator out there is talking about it, because suffice to say, Crow Country is a masterwork. It is an amazing game, and it's not so far above its station that it elevates the genre as a whole, but it is one of those games that's kind of a landmark to show every single positive aspect of the genre of survival horror. I'm still compiling notes. I want to make a full-ass video about Crow Country at some point, and I have well over 30 gigs of stored gameplay footage somewhere, and I want to use that to make a full-on video at some point, dissecting the entire game and giving an entire breakdown of how the story goes. But, that's going to come out probably a year from now, because it takes a goddamn long time for me to actually make any video on this channel. Yeah, but, we'll get there when we get there. Crow Country, as a game, for those who don't know, stars a detective by the name of Mara Forrest as she goes to an abandoned theme park in search of the owner and creator by the name of Edward Crow. Crow Country is that kind of game that you look at and go, this is very interesting. But the moment you play it, is when you realize there's more to it. This game's intuitive and incredibly intelligent design, as well as almost brilliant additions to the genre, make it such a standout title that I have to recommend. Of all things that we talk about today, this is probably my top recommendation. It does cost about $20 if I remember correctly, but I'd still recommend playing it. A few elements that I think definitely stand out. The main three is 1, it plays with your expectations if you are a survival horror veteran. If you have played any amount of survival horror games in your entire life, then you'd know that a staple of the genre is the fixed camera element, where you will walk in, the camera angles are static, looking down at you from a third-person angle, and you just have to walk into that scene that you're in. This game makes you think that that is the perspective that you are going, but the second you realize that you can actually shift left and right is a complete game changer, meaning that this entire world is a 3D render and gives you so much more options for maneuverability. It makes the game so much more easy as well, and because of that, it just completely blew me out of the water in terms of just my expectations, as it's such a genre-defying idea. I know it seems kind of dumb for me to point out that simply having camera controls in a PlayStation 1 style survival horror game, but it sounds like I'm gassing this up for no reason, but it is kind of interesting how it's displayed. The second aspect to the game is that it uses backtracking in a way that I have only ever seen done in Resident Evil Remake, though I could probably name a few other places, where as you play the game, more and more enemies will appear in different areas. It simply starts with you seeing a single one of these things, the guests. They are wandering the fairgrounds, and there's only one, maybe two here and there. And then as you go to the next area of the game to say get a key that you need to open a door, you'll come back and there will be more. If you kill an enemy in an area, they tend to not be there when you come back, but that doesn't mean there's going to be no enemies when you show up. As the game progresses, you start to realize that running isn't as valid of an option as you'd think, because the areas become so clogged with enemies that you have no choice but to either fight or find a way around. And I find that's like a super new and interesting idea for gameplay, as it was only ever shown, to me at least, in Resident Evil Remake, where if you kill a zombie but don't burn its body, at some point you will come back and that zombie could turn into what is referred to as a Crimson Head, which is a much more difficult enemy, but I'm getting off track here. And the third and final thing that I think is the most interesting draw to this game is definitely the soundtrack. The OST for this game, done by Okoroid, is exactly what it needs to be. The sound design as a whole for this game is amazing. It's on par with some of the greats. There are ambient drones, melodic sounds that sound like the distant humming of a nightmare. There's thrumming sounds that sound like the clawing grind of a broken instrument. I would even go as far as to compare it to something like Silent Hill 1, which I know sounds like high praise, but it does set the tone as much. If you mute this game while you are playing it, you are doing yourself a disservice, as this game is absolutely amazing with its sound design. Even the enemies, these sounds wax and wane from stereotypical fodder you'd see from a PlayStation 1 horror game all the way up to something that legit will give you anxiety just from the sound of it. I'm going to do a test right now, and I love doing this. So if you guys are doing something, maybe take a break from it for a second and close your eyes. I'm going to not show anything on screen, and I'm just going to play just a normal piece of the soundtrack that plays in an area. Not a boss fight, not an encounter, it just plays in an area. And you tell me how uncomfortable it made you. Isn't that wacky? Yeah, I hate that. I love it, but I hate it. So, with this game being as good as it is, I think that it deserves a lot more praise. I know outside of the survival horror community, it's not exactly as well known as it should be. I know it was built up for a little while, but if you haven't heard of it and or you haven't played it, I'd recommend giving it a try. This shit is chef's kiss. The way the game builds on the past tropes and trappings of older games in the genre makes it a masterful execution of survival horror that I will for sure revisit at some point. I have to get a few more playthroughs under my belt in order to make a video. And there's one last thing I want to mention before I go, and that's there is a specific setting called Exploration Mode, where instead of playing the game traditionally with enemies nearby, you can actually play the game with all the enemies removed, and it makes the game a completely different vibe. It feels similar to that of like a 3D exploration style game that you'd play in like the mid-2000s. I love that, and I think it's really, really fun. It even changes some of the dialogue options in the game. I think of all the games that I could possibly expand on in the future from this list, this is the game that I'm most likely going to do. But what do you guys think? Would you like to know more about this specific game, or would you like to know about others? Regardless, I have another game to talk about before we wrap up today, and this is going to be probably the weirdest one I talk about, but regardless, let's get into it. So let's talk about Contradiction, Spot the Liar. Okay, please, just indulge me here. This is not everyone's cup of tea. Honestly, I don't think most of you are going to heed me when I say that this is probably one of the better examples of horror-adjacent media I've ever played. Hell, I don't even think most of you are going to click on this section of the video and think that this is a video game of some sort, because all of you that are watching, according to my demographics, are probably going to be between the age of 18 and 21, which means that if I say the phrase, a full-motion video game to you, you are probably not going to know what I'm talking about. And that's also because I'm a part of that demographic. I'm not actually so old that I have grown up playing those games, but in the mid to late 90s, there was this kind of craze of adding fully rendered live action video to games. If you look it up, there's a few classics back then. These specific classics struck my interest back in high school because I was just a very big fan of niche horror topics. So if you go back, you'll find games like Phantasmagoria, Darkseed, stuff that has either full motion graphics or so on and so forth. I know that a lot of people would probably know of this style of game if you're in the horror community because of a game by the name of Harvest. Contradiction is not those games. It is in fact its own thing. You might actually recognize the specific style and publisher of this specific game, as about a few years back, the other game that they made was doing the rounds on horror Let's Play YouTube, as a lot of people were playing their other game, which was At Dead of Night. I remember this because I played this game a while ago, and I remember seeing Markiplier doing Markiplier things and playing At Dead of Night, and I was like, oh my goodness, I've seen this before. So to see that they linked up together and they were from the same publisher was very interesting to me. So, what is Contradiction? Why am I talking about it, and why do I think you should play it? It is a relatively cheap mystery adventure game where you play the part of Detective Jenks. Jenks is an oddball of a character. Your experience with the game is more or less going to be predicated on if you like this man or you don't like this man. So with that in mind, if you enjoy this character and think that they're kind of funny, you're going to like it. If you don't, you're probably not going to enjoy this game. The game is about him going to a rural town named Edenton, where you are tasked with discovering within about 24 hours the actual reason for the death of a local individual. Think of it like Who Killed Laura Palmer for Twin Peaks. Showing up, he knows that in his mind the death has been ruled as a you can't say this word without your video getting kind of hidden. So kind of read between the lines here, but she was determined to have gone out on her own terms. But there was a lot of very suspicious details around this death that caused people to kind of question it. So Jenks was sent in, and he has until the morning of the next day to find out if there's a reason to continue the investigation or not. The core mechanics of the game are that you will get an item, you go to the 5 to 7 people that you can actually interact with in the game, you show them it, you get their ideas and feelings on whatever the item is, and then you are given this menu option. This menu is filled with every single point that they made, and thus the name of the game comes into play, where you're allowed to click 2 ideas from every statement that they've given you, and you keep track of it in your little notebook. And if the 2 ideas contradict each other, that provokes a further inquisition, where you can push them further to get more information. It pays for you to actually pay attention to what they're saying and the tone in which they're saying it, but as the game progresses, you find more and more people who are a bit more tight-lipped and have their story more well rehearsed. But it makes things so much more satisfying when you find what is essentially the game's central antagonist, and you have this one-on-one battle of wits with them to try and find holes in their story. There is a lot to love about this game, and it's very rewarding, as it's at its core a puzzle game, and puzzle games tend to be especially rewarding for those who pay attention to them. So with all that in mind, the game is kind of going to live or die on its acting. As I mentioned, Jenks is kind of the central character, and if you don't find his quirky witticisms that interesting, the game is going to be dead on arrival for you. But the same can be said for the rest of the cast in the game, as there isn't a large cast of characters, but I find that the acting is usually pretty okay, but sometimes it can be pretty bad, depending on who you're talking to.
Did you know Kate?
Not very well. She came in a few times, but she was quite a moody person. You could tell she had problems.
When was the last time you saw her?
Friday. She popped in for a minute.
And when was that?
7-ish.
Was she on her own?
I didn't see who she was with. She put £20 on the bar and then left.
What was that for?
A breakage, presumably.
£20? Just for a beer glass?
Well, she was very drunk. She just put it on the bar and then walked out.
Was there a broken glass?
Not that I noticed. But she was a strange girl.
Again, the central antagonist of the game that you get to later towards the end of the game, which is Paul Rand, is one of the most interesting character acting choices I've ever seen in a game, especially a live-action game, and you can be quite enthralled in a conversation as you're trying to pick apart what people are saying to find out if this individual, the woman that you're there to find out, if she was murdered or not, was murdered or not. It definitely puts you in the position of a detective, and there's a lot of good things for people who like to pick apart scenes and details and figure out if things are actually the way they seem. The game does go some weird places, and I find it's a lot more fun than the other game that they produced that the Let's Play YouTubers were playing. So with all that in mind, I do think that you should all try this game out. I recently had to replay a lot of it, or at least the first half of the game, in order to get video footage for this segment, even though it's like, 5 to 10 minutes at most, but I found I was getting enthralled back in the narrative of the game itself, as the performances of all the characters are just so Silent Hill 2-esque, if that makes sense, where everything seems like this is a normal human emotion, but there's something wrong with every performance.
Do you know what this is?
Oh, you'll have to ask Ryan about that.
So this is Ryan's.
It's to do with one of Ryan's methods on the course.
Go on.
Well, masks allow you to play it being someone different for a while. Students find it quite liberating.
So this would be for a student?
I think that one's Ryan's, but students do wear them, yes.
Or it could not be, and they're just weird and bad actors. But hey, what do I know? I'm just a guy talking about a full-motion video game that was released within the last 5 years. 10 years? God, it's hard to keep track of these things. But regardless, one last thing I want to say is that after playing this game, you're going to have a vocal stim that is basically just, have you seen this before? Because Jenks says that whenever he shows a character anything in the game, and you're going to hear it like 5 or 6 times if you haven't talked to a character in a long time and you have a lot to show them. It's so funny.
Have a look at this.
That it started to make me like chuckle every time I heard him say it. So there is that. I would recommend this game as it's a very unique twist on an old style of gameplay that you don't really see anymore. So yeah, check out Contradiction. So those were some games I think all of you should try out. All of them are on Steam, and all of them are like below $20, if not free. Though I think a lot of them are on sale as well, as it is the summer. So if you do try them out, let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed any of the particular games that I just discussed in here, also let me know in the comments, because I want to cover more stuff that you guys would enjoy. I should also note that I was like halfway through the production of this video when I jumped from 60 subscribers to like almost 1,000 as of me recording this specific line. Where the fuck did you all come from? I am shocked and a little bit scared, but hell yeah. Welcome. I'm glad you guys showed up. I'm not going to post that often. So yeah, thank you for showing up. I want you all to know that the Funger Wunger video is just 10 minutes, but that was more of a practice session for me. So I want to aim for all of my videos after this to be about 20 minutes or longer, and I want to take my time with them. So there might be months in between me posting, or there might be weeks, who knows. Depends on how much free time I have, because I have other things that I do on the side, and I just want to make this a fun passion project for me, because I am very passionate about the topic of horror games. So yeah, remember to like and subscribe, as it helps this channel grow and develop and shows that you guys want to hear more of my unique voice on the topic of these horror games. And if you have any horror games you'd like me to check out, feel free to mention it. I've got a few things in my quiver that I want to whip out. Oh, I forgot. The title of this video does say I'm going to be covering 5 games. And I really did only cover 4, so where does that leave us now, considering there's likely only less than 20 seconds left in the video? Good night, everyone. Until next time.